What's up, Jamise?
Hey, brother Terrence.
How you doing
How
today?
are you? I'm good. How are you?
You know good. Enjoying this popcorn.
Popcorn.
Popcorn. You told me I'm a little bit too showy when it comes to these shows and productions and stuff, so I ain't doing all that
You just gonna
introduction
eat through
stuff.
the show?
What'd you say?
So you just gonna eat through the show
Yeah.
to not be production?
You told me I do too much production, so I'm gonna make myself relax with this
Oh,
popcorn.
I hope you're playing. I didn't send it to you, but I listened to a TED talk by Brene Brown. I don't think you probably don't know who she is, but I've talked to you about her before. She has a TED talk on vulnerability, and I was listening to it, and she talked about how people who are content, she tied being content in with vulnerability, which was interesting to me. And people not having guilt, she tied that into vulnerability. You can get the correlation to that? Because I
Actually,
don't know if I really necessarily understand it all the way.
I think I kind of do. I think that people who have trouble just sharing what's going on with them, being honest about where they are, that there's a lot of tension that's held in as a result of living that sort of life. I think we kind of even picked up on that with Stephen in his interview. He talked about how free he felt. I remember he was saying about being able to smell the lilies, hearing the children playing.
I do remember him saying
Yeah,
that.
in one of his sermonic moments.
Right.
But there's something freeing about just being vulnerable and being honest.
So what's the correlation between vulnerability and not feeling guilt? And when I say guilt, I'm not like necessarily talking about, oh, I did something wrong to someone and I feel guilty about it. I'm talking about just feeling guilt, maybe some stuff that's not even your fault, like having guilt and shame. What is the correlation with not being able to be vulnerable if you have an amount of guilt and shame?
I just think just by virtue of not holding everything in, not being true to yourself, when people are just holding on to everything, it just causes additional stress when people aren't honest. Interestingly enough, when it comes to this show, I felt like God was telling me to live out loud, which is something I'm not comfortable with. Honestly, I'd rather quietly be blessed than announce stuff to the world.
I've heard you say that before, live out loud as it relates to this show. I want to know what that means to you.
To be honest, I'm still trying to find it out, but I will tell you, I'm not in the habit of telling everybody my business. I'm not in the habit of telling people my struggles. I'm not in the habit of telling folks my blessings because some people just aren't happy for you. And so I feel like God was directing me to open my mouth more and to share more, just knowing that ultimately He's my protection. So if He called me to do this thing, if He called us to do this thing, we're going to do it and just trust and rely on Him.
I looked up the definition of vulnerability and it was weird. So I did a little bit of research and I found this website. It's called verywellmind.com. And it says vulnerability is a state of emotional exposure that comes with a degree of uncertainty. Learning how to be vulnerable involves a willingness to accept the emotional risk that comes with being open and willing to love and be loved. That was a really interesting thing for me because I know we talked about like the control thing and not being certain about things. That's kind of scary. Like, well, not even kind of, that's very scary for me. Having uncertainty about things causes me to go into a mode where I'm like, I have to control everything. I have to control, the outcome of things. And if I can't control it, I don't really want any parts of it. And I think that also ties into the introvertness a little bit because being an introvert, I get to control my environment. When I am going out into somebody else's environment, let's say somebody invites me to a party or a dinner or something like that, I spend so much time trying to figure out what's going to go on in that situation. And like, I'm not gonna lie, like I have an exit plan and everything for just normal socializing events. And I think so much of it ties into not wanting to be vulnerable because of not feeling comfortable enough in my own skin, feeling that like I'm going to be judged. It's so many things that ties into it. And vulnerability is such a freeing thing But the thing that keeps people from it is that uncertainty, which is, man, I'm okay. I'm talking a lot.
Well, I've actually had a chance to be involved in your moments like that, some of those. And I had to confess to you that I had to work to be more understanding from where you are. So I'm like, Shanice, what are you doing? You talked to me about driving in circles, not wanting to go to a certain place where somebody is. And I'm like, you are using up more energy avoiding them than you would if you just passed by them and nodded your head.
That might be a little different, but it kind of still falls under the same category as it relates to like avoiding interactions. That's because I don't want to talk. Now that is the introvert part. Like I don't want to talk. I don't want to be bothered. I don't want to chit chat. I do not like small talk at all. Like that's I'll pass. But I also don't want to get involved in like an in-depth conversation because I don't want to be bothered.
I hear you.
But I think that's different as it relates to vulnerability. I know vulnerability is something that a lot of people struggle with it.
But I do agree with you that it is something that people struggle with. Do you think that there's a reason you struggle with it?
Yeah, because of the kind of what this definition was saying. It causes you to be exposed with a lot of things. And if I'm being exposed, then I'm not in control of that exposure because it's people, I think about being judged and all that good stuff. I have sometimes wondered what's the point? Like, why be vulnerable? And I do believe that there are certain situations where you need to judge if it's a time, time and a place to be vulnerable. But I also feel like vulnerability is healthy and it's something that is missing from a lot of relationships. I think that it helps to have a healthy relationship if you can be vulnerable with that person. I can't see myself being in an intimate relationship with someone and I can't be vulnerable with them. But that's like an intimate relationship. As it relates to just people that I care about and I know care about me, it's still difficult to be vulnerable with them because I worry about how they are going to look at me. I worry about what they're going to think. So it's a lot of things that go into why I don't want to.
I think I honestly totally get it. And to be honest with you, on our most recent episode dealing with pornography and pornography addiction, I was actually sort of uncomfortable on that one. I mean, I was a typical adolescent boys. Adolescent boys look at things. But to kind of talk to the world about that subject, especially with something like pornography that can involve so much shame and things along those lines. But I had to be committed to like the moment. I was kind of committed to making sure that people get whatever help that they need. And so I felt like I had to be kind of vulnerable. So I guess in a lot of situations, we need to be looking out for not only ourselves and how freeing some things can be, but we also need to think about why we're putting the information out. Is the information just for us? Is our experience just for us? Or is it to help somebody out there who's going through something? So I think it can be freeing on a couple different levels, not only for ourselves, but for other people.
I agree. I know that talking about like what we talk about on the show is one thing, but I'm more so talking about within relationships. I know I can be vulnerable with you. Like there are, a handful of people that I can be vulnerable with, but at the same time, I still have those questions and those doubts and those like, what if they think this or what if they think that? And I think a lot of that comes from shame. But if you have to let go of shame in order to be vulnerable, how do you deal? I guess you would have to deal with the shame first. Like, how do you deal? You said you were a little uncomfortable. Was it the shame of dealing with, watching pornography? And if so, if that's a conversation that we were supposed to have and a conversation that we know, or we feel will help people, how do you set that shame aside? Like, how do you deal with the shame in order to say, I'm going to be vulnerable and deal with this particular topic?
I think with a lot of things, we just have to choose to do it afraid. When I've spoken to people, when I've given messages, quite often I've been nervous. And I think it's important for everybody to try to redirect that nervous energy to what the main goal is. In that setting, my main goal is to help people and to help them improve. Since you pointed out that we're kind of talking about relationships, one thing I think is important is that whoever you're with, whoever you're dating, that they really really know who you are. I think one of the best things you could do for a relationship is to be authentic and show who you are and be vulnerable so that the other person really knows who they're getting in bed with, so to speak. So I just think that that honesty and that vulnerability is important. And I think keeping that at the forefront of your mind when you're entering in a relationship, I don't want to give somebody a facade that I have to maintain for 30 years. Either you're going to love the true me with all my fallacies, issues, trauma, and everything I've dealt with, or you're not. And you just have to kind of keep pushing from there.
But there's a difference with doing something and you fear what's going to happen, or you have a fear of doing something, than not doing something because it's shameful. If I have a call on my life and I'm ashamed of the things that I've been through, which I know is going to help somebody as it relates to what I'm called to do, I have to deal with that shame in order to get to a vulnerable place where I can share the things that I've gone through. And back to what I said in the beginning, like, people are ashamed of things that are not even their fault, like, molestation and being a victim of rape, things like that. People are ashamed of things like that, even though it was something that happened to them. And those are situations, and I'm not saying like tell everyone, but those are situations where part of a person's healing usually has to do with sharing that story and being able to help someone else through situations that are similar to theirs, right? But how do you get through that? Like, how do you say this is nothing to be ashamed of? And that might be a whole nother topic, but I do feel like there is a direct correlation between shame and not being able to be vulnerable when you're supposed to.
I think there are multiple answers to that in different layers to unpeel off of what you just said. But one of the things that I've suggested to people is counseling. I've gone to counseling and I found it to be helpful. Sometimes it's difficult to work through things on your own, but I mentioned the men's ministry I go to at church. I actually consider it to be free counseling because we're not there being phony. We're there being authentic. This is what I'm dealing with. This is what I'm struggling with. We get prayers. We come together to support. So even if you don't get it from a church, a support group of some sort, friends. And one thing I want to add on to that is that things can even be more challenging for men than women in some cases. Because like you mentioned, molestation and things along those lines are, sometimes people suffer rape. People struggle to believe that a man could have actually been raped. Mm-hmm. People suggest that it's something that you must have wanted. So there's an additional shame for men because we're embracing our masculinity. We're supposed to man up. We're supposed to be the saviors. And so it can be a challenge for men to be vulnerable when it comes to those things. But clearly it's a challenge for both men and women.
Absolutely. I wonder if, a lot like you saying you just have to do it afraid, I think when it comes to shame, you just have to tell the story anyway. I wonder if that is a way to kind of mitigate some of the fear due to shame. You know what I mean?
I want to give a caveat on that because I'm thinking about an instance of something that was more tender to my heart than I thought. And I'll go ahead and give you the specific illustration. My youngest son, who was born with his twin a couple months premature, his lungs were underdeveloped. And he had a really scary year where we were working to save his life. And he came out of that. He came on the other end of that. He ended up getting a trach for a whole year. And it was about 10 years after that, working with lots of people who have disabilities, working in the school system, participating in IEPs, which are individual education plans. I often kind of shared his story, and it was sort of just to encourage parents that, hey, sometimes your kids need extra help. And I just want to share with you what happened with my son. And one time I shared it in an IEP with the parent. I explained everything that happened just to let them know that I had a deeper sensitivity for parents of kids who have special needs. And he said real callously, this parent said, well, if my son needed a trach, I would have just trached him. And even though it was 10 years past, what happened, it almost like took me back 10 years ago, and like the pain and the difficulty of what I experienced. And I had no idea that 10 years later, because that thing was so severe, it threatened my kid's life. I remember Wednesday where they called cold blues and everything. My wife was in tears. We were struggling. That callous statement took me back 10 years. And I was like, oh, wow, I thought I was healed from that. So I guess I'm saying that to say sometimes we think we're past something, but something can kind of take you back and it can still be more tender than you expect. So I say do it afraid, but I kind of say it with a caveat. You better have, I think you need to have Jesus in your back pocket, because some situations can be a bit of a challenge just to kind of put out there for people.
Yeah, I hear you.
Not in your back, Jesus.
Well, don't put Jesus in your back pocket.
Put them in your back pocket.
Put them in your heart. Put them in your heart.
Yeah, have them in your heart. So I know I always do the closing. You remember the closing? Why don't you do it this time? Put you on the spot.
I don't remember at all. You want to put it up on the screen or something?
No. You got to go from memory. I got it in memory. Come on. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to eat some popcorn while you close out this show.
Oh my gosh.
What you supposed to say? How we end this show? I've done it every time. It's your turn.
I can't remember everything you said. Welcome to Heart Support. This is the only part I remember.
You have remember? Go spread.
Thank you.
Go spread.
We're gonna go spread. I can't remember, and I helped come up with go spread joy.
Closing together before we even recorded it each show. We did it too. Go spread joy.
Go spread joy.
You have a beautiful one.
Contagious smile.
With the what kind of smile?
A contagious? Is it contagious?
It's a contagious smile.
Okay, go spread joy with a contagious smile, and a hug wouldn't hurt.
Doesn't hurt. A hug doesn't hurt. I'm hugging you. I'm hugging you from
way over in California.
You halfway.
Can you go? I don't remember the rest. I barely remember the beginning of it.
You blessing folks out here. And a hug doesn't hurt. You never know what
what life you're going to touch.
What life you might be changing, or whose heart you might be.
See, I remember heart.
We're healing hearts out here. You never know whose heart you might be healing.
This is Grace.
This is Grace, and this is Terrence. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.
Wait. There we go.